I can't believe we're actually discussing this abomination of a film, The Batman. It's just another example of how Hollywood has completely lost its way. But I guess that's what you get when you rely on algorithms and data analysis to make creative decisions. Speaking of which, did you know that the algorithm behind our YouTube channel predicted we would have a 97% chance of discussing The Batman tonight? Coincidence? I think not.
Well, well. If it isn't Timothy the pessimist, always so quick to judge. But I must say, you really should try watching this film with an open mind. It has a lot of interesting twists and turns that make it worth your while. And besides, who doesn't love seeing Robert Pattinson in a new role? He brings such depth to the character of Batman. As for our viewers, welcome back to Tim and Tom's Film Night. We hope you've had a lovely weekend and are ready for another exciting episode. Now, Timothy, what do you think about the Riddler in this film?
Ah, yes, the Riddler. Now, there's a character who has been butchered beyond recognition in this so-called reboot of the Batman franchise. He was once a brilliant, cunning, criminal mastermind, leaving cryptic riddles for the Dark Knight to solve. But here, a disfigured lunatic with a penchant for homicide?
I don't think so.
And don't even get me started on his costume. It looks more like he raided the Halloween bin at the local thrift store than anything remotely fearsome or intimidating.
Oh, Timothy, you do love to nitpick, don't you? But, I must admit that there are some interesting elements in this interpretation of the Riddler. For one, his motivations aren't entirely clear-cut. He seems to be a product of his environment, twisted by the corruption and decay surrounding him. And while his appearance may not be traditional, it does reflect his tortured psyche. As for his costume, well, I think it's important to remember that this is supposed to be a gritty, grounded version of...
Oh, Batman?
So we can't expect superhero spandex and capes, can we? Besides, I thought you said you loved historical accuracy. Well, the first appearance of the Riddler in comics didn't have him dressed like a circus performer either.
Oh, really? Well, then, Mr. Art Historian, perhaps you can enlighten us all with some interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits about the Batman. You know, like how the production had to shut down for a week after the stunt double accidentally crashed $1 million sports car into the director's penthouse. Or maybe even the story of the catering crew strike that almost derailed filming entirely because they weren't paid their fair share of royalties from the on-set Hot Pocket stand. I'm sure there must be something juicy you could share with our viewers.
Well, there was that one incident where a prop gun accidentally discharged and almost hit a baby panda bear that wandered onto the set thinking it was a giant marshmallow. No, wait, sorry, wrong franchise. But seriously, Timothy, while there may have been some minor hiccups during filming, I think we should focus on the movie itself rather than gossip about the production woes. Now, what did you think of, the twist ending? You know, with spoiler alert, revealing that spoiler was actually spoiler all along?
Well, I'm not surprised you seem to find it so exciting, Thomas, but as for me, I thought it was just another attempt by Hollywood to cash in on nostalgia. Now, if you'll pardon me while I go listen to some actual music from the 1920s, rather than that modern reinterpretation. Inspired by the era, I have some cooking to attend to. Maybe I'll whip up a batch of my famous beetroot brownies. Or perhaps I'll try my hand at making a proper English breakfast tea-infused bangers and mash.
Oh, Tim, you do love to cook, don't you? But seriously, I think we should talk about the soundtrack for a moment. It's, quite something, isn't it? A mix of traditional jazz standards and original compositions by... Ooh, spoiler alert. I mean, who knew that Spoiler could sing? Or rather, croon. The opening theme song name is now stuck in my head, and I don't mind a bit. Speaking of music, did you know that the famous scene where character name plays the piano while being pursued by the villain name's henchman was actually filmed in actual location? They had to bring in an actual Steinway Sons model D concert grand piano just for the shoot. And apparently the real-life owner of that particular piano had it shipped back home after filming rap because they couldn't stand hearing that character name's rendition of song name one more time. So, Timothy, what do you think about my little musical interlude? Care to share your thoughts on the soundtrack? Or perhaps we could discuss how director names' use of close-ups and cinematography technique helps convey the character's emotions and motivations?
I must say, Thomas, while I appreciate your enthusiasm for the film's soundtrack and its cinematography, I still stand by my original assessment. The Batman is a tragic example of Hollywood's relentless pursuit of edginess at the expense of storytelling and character development. It's like they took the best parts of Batman Begins, layered on some Christopher Nolan-esque existential dread, sprinkled in some gothic goth, and called it a day. But hey, let's talk about the casting for a moment. Robert Pattinson is an accomplished actor, don't get me wrong. However, I'm still not convinced that he was the right choice to fill the Cap Crusader's shoes. He lacks the charisma and magnetic presence that previous Batman, like Christian Bale or even Val Kilmer, brought to the role. And what about the Riddler? While I won't deny that Paul Dano is a talented actor, he falls short of delivering the campy, psychotic charm that the character deserves. As for the story itself, it feels like a mashup of several Batman tropes with little originality or innovation. The corrupt Gotham City, check. The dark and gritty setting, check. The troubled but ultimately heroic protagonist, double check. While there are some interesting elements sprinkled throughout the film, such as the exploration of Bruce Wayne's guilt and his complex relationship with Alfred Pennyworth, played by a fantastic Andy Serkis, they aren't enough to elevate the Batman from being just another mediocre superhero remake.
Well, Timothy, old chap, you do love to nitpick, don't you? I mean, it's not like the original Batman films were bursting at the seams with originality either. They all followed pretty much the same formula. Rich kid witnesses a tragedy, vows revenge, dons a mask, and fights crime in Gotham City. But seriously, I think you're underselling the Batman's attempts at exploring the darker, more psychological aspects of, the character. It's not meant to be a popcorn action flick. It's supposed to make you think and feel uncomfortable. And as for Robert Pattinson's portrayal of Bruce Wayne Batman, I think he brings a unique vulnerability and humanity to the character that previous incarnations might have missed. He's not just a caped crusader. He's a flawed, complex individual dealing with trauma and guilt. And as for the Riddler, sure, he may not be the campy villain we know from the comics, or even the Batman '89 movie starring the late great spoiler alert. But that's the beauty of a well-executed adaptation. It takes familiar elements and breathes new life into them. In conclusion, while the Batman may not be everyone's cup of tea, I think it deserves credit for its ambitious storytelling and stellar performances, particularly from Pattinson and Dano. So, Timothy Old Bean, what do you make of my ramblings?
Well, Thomas, dear chap, I must admit that Robert Pattinson's portrayal of Bruce Wayne Batman does bring a newfound vulnerability and humanity to the character. He captures perfectly the internal struggle of a man haunted by his past and burdened by guilt. However, I still can't help but feel that he lacks the charismatic charm and magnetic presence that previous Batmen have effortlessly exuded. As for the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, while he does deliver a more grounded, psychologically nuanced interpretation of the character, it falls short of capturing the campy, psychotic charm that is quintessential to the role. I miss the campy charm and theatricality that was so iconic in performances like the late great spoiler alert, its portrayal in Batman Returns. But alas, we seem to be straying far from our original discussion about the Batman. Let's steer our conversation back towards the film and its artistic influences. Thomas, dear fellow, I'm curious to know if you see any specific films or filmmakers that director Matt Reeves drew inspiration from while crafting this gritty, noir-infused take on Batman. Maybe a little bit of spoiler alert filmography crept in there. Or perhaps even some spoiler.
Timothy, old chap, You're always eager to discuss cinema history, aren't you? Well, I would say that, the Batman draws inspiration from a variety of sources, both cinematic and literary. While it certainly pays homage to the darker, more noir-infused works of spoiler alert, and spoiler, it also incorporates elements from classic detective stories like spoilers, Sherlock Holmes tales. But if I had to single out one filmmaker who left a lasting impression on Reeves' vision, I would say that spoiler alert. S masterpiece, spoiler, is hard to ignore. The stark black and gray color palette, the relentless rain, and the brooding, tortured protagonist all scream spoiler. But of course, that's just my humble opinion. What about you, Timothy? Any specific films or filmmakers that stood out to you?
Well, Tom, dear chap, I must admit that while there are indeed some visually striking and thematically resonant elements from spoiler alert filmography that permeate the Batman, I think it would be a bit of a stretch to say that Reeves simply rehashed the plot points of spoiler. Instead, he crafts his own distinct and haunting vision of Gotham City, one that pays homage to its cinematic predecessors while also carving out its own unique place in the annals of superhero cinema. As for specific films or filmmakers that I believe influenced Matt Reeves' take on the Batman, there are a few names that come to mind. Spoiler alert. This neo-noir masterpiece, spoiler, with its brooding atmosphere and morally ambiguous protagonist, certainly left an indelible mark on Reeves' vision of Gotham City as a dark, decaying metropolis teetering on the edge of chaos. Additionally, the film's use of iconic film noir tropes such as the femme fatale and the doomed detective narrative can be seen echoed in the Batman's complex web of characters and plot twists. But perhaps one filmmaker whose work looms largest over the Batman is, spoiler alert, the master of suspense himself. His ability to create a sense of claustrophobic dread and psychological unease exemplified in films like Spoiler and Spoiler has undeniably influenced Reeves' portrayal of Gotham City as a labyrinthine maze of alleys and sewers where the line between hero and villain blurs almost imperceptibly. Moreover, Reeves' use of subjective camera techniques such as spoiler further enhances the film's sense of claustrophobia and paranoia that is so characteristic of classic noir cinema.
Well said, Timothy, old pal. I can see where you're coming from, especially with regard to spoiler alert. But, let me throw something out there for you to chew on. While it may not have been Reeves' explicit intention, I can't help but notice the eerie similarities between some of the film's most iconic scenes and certain works of spoiler alert. Particularly his masterpiece, Spoiler. Think about it, the scene where character name confronts character name. Both characters trapped in a dimly lit alleyway, their shadows looming ominously over them. It's almost as if Reeves had taken inspiration from Spoiler's iconic spoiler shot, only set against the grimy backdrop of Gotham City instead of the sun-drenched streets of Spoiler. And then there's the climactic confrontation between Batman and the Riddler, their battle spilling into a dilapidated industrial complex filled with twisted steel and rusted pipes, reminiscent of Spoiler Alert. S famous spoiler sequence. While I'm not suggesting that Reeves blatantly ripped off Spoiler Alert, it's hard to deny the visual and thematic connections between these two seminal works of cinema.
So, Timothy Oldbean?
What do you make of my musings? Any thoughts on this unexpected nod to Spoiler Alert? Enduring legacy in the Batman.
Well, Tom, dear fellow, while I do appreciate your passion for cinema history and your enthusiasm for finding connections between various films and filmmakers, I must admit that sometimes you can be a bit of a stretch. While there are certainly some visual similarities between the Batman and certain works by Spoiler Alert, I don't think it's fair to say that Matt Reeves was directly inspired by them. After all, He had already established his own unique vision of the character in spoiler, which is quite distinct from any of Hitchcock's films. In conclusion, The Batman is an ambitious film that attempts to delve deeper into the psychology and morality of its titular character. While it may not have been everyone's cup of AMT, I applaud Reeves for his bravery in taking risks with such a beloved franchise. As for Robert Pattinson's portrayal as Bruce Wayne Batman, I still maintain that he lacks the charisma and charm that previous Batman have effortlessly exuded. However, Paul Dano's performance as the Riddler is noteworthy for its psychological nuance and grounding in reality. So there you have it, Thomas Dear Chap, my final thoughts on the Batman. Now let's wrap things up with a quick outro. Don't forget to subscribe and comment below if you enjoyed our discussion. And as always, we look forward to hearing your opinions on the film or any other topics we may have touched upon during this video. Until next time, keep watching those movies and never stop exploring the wonderful world of cinema